everyone. Welcome to another one of our collaborative conversations. Today, we are joined by Megan Cave from the Hangout Spot, and then also Samantha Feynman, Director of New Frontiers, and I'm Casey Schmalacker. One thing I did just want to start off with, we are joined by two holders of Masters of Education. So there's going to be an educational slant to this. If you did not get it from the title, Social Skills Instruction, How We Can Do Better. And so Megan, I'm going to toss this over to you first. As we're talking through today, can parents utilize similar strategies that we talk about? As professionals, and should they? And where might that line be when knowing that a parent wants to really seek professional support with developing social skills?
Absolutely, yeah. So at the Hangout Spot, we use a science called applied behavior analysis, which in essence is simply the science of learning and behavior. So I kind of have a multi-step answer to this question. So the first point I want to make is that wherever you are in life, whatever space you're in, whatever people you're interacting with, the principles of learning are the same, right? So the scientific principles behind how we acquire skills and overcome barriers remain consistent across environments. Now, that being said, home, school, a provider's office, the playground, the prom, those are all very, very, very different scenarios. And so the strategies that parents use in different scenarios are likely going to be different than what providers use to some degree, because the function of behaviors and the ways that kids are applying skills may differ across environments, right? So it's kind of a classic tale of things may look different at home than they look in other places. And if you tackle two different things using the same strategy, you may not get good results, right? So our interventions and our strategies really need to be tailored to the specifics of what's happening within each environment. So yes, the principles of learning, the science behind what we do, that is what it is. It's how you pick the strategies and what strategies are particularly relevant for each setting that's important. The other thing that I think is important to talk about here is that parents are parents, right? Parents are not providers. We don't expect parents to be teachers, although sometimes these days we do with the world we live in, but we don't expect parents to be psychologists. We don't expect parents to be doctors, right? Because their role is mom and dad. And so at the end of the day, while we certainly want to ensure consistency and we certainly want to support our kids as best as we possibly can, it's okay to not always be able to implement everything that your service provider is doing within your home, because you also need to be a family and you need to be mom and dad, right? So we often, when we're talking with parents, we pick the one or two strategies that we know are A, the easiest to implement, because then they're more likely to be consistently applied, and B, that are going to get us the most bang for our buck. So while we may not be able to do all the things that we know are successful during our sessions at home, we can pick the one or two that we know will make the biggest impact for the family. And we really work to educate the parents to be able to implement those strategies consistently, because the consistency is what makes a huge difference. Did I answer your question there, Casey?
You did, and I'd love to see Sam. I don't know if you have something to add in. It's a little early in this webinar for me to be pulling in your son and daughter as examples, but I didn't know if you had something to add in. That was very comprehensive, Megan. It definitely helped.
I would just say I think it's, I think there are components to, social skills and social skills instruction that, we can kind of generalize, but then at the same time, I 100% agree with Megan. The expectation is different. And since you brought up my children, even though I never speak about them, how I speak with my children and the expectations of how my children speak to me are very different than how I know they speak to their friends or how they speak in school. And so, and also there's that emotional component when you're a parent, right? So sometimes, sometimes social interactions can be a little bit more charged, right? They can be a little bit more emotional. And so there's definitely differences, but at the same time, it all comes down to understanding, how to present yourself and understanding how others are presenting themselves to you, and being able to, fix any misunderstandings in that relationship that may occur when you're trying to communicate with each other.
And so one just add on to that, Megan, to jump back to you. Like you talked about like parents are parents. And so I sometimes think about like a middle schooler who's cursing a lot. Like, should parents be saying, yeah, that's good, great, like go and curse? Or is it good having that balancing factor of, no, don't curse in front of me, like that's wrong, don't do that then? And so is it kind of like that everyone plays a different role in like, and I guess just the one thing further on that with professionals, how can you encourage parents to complement social skills supports that are developed, knowing their role in the equation?
Yeah, definitely. So social skills are incredibly nuanced, right? And I often equate them to being as complex as calculus, because they're really complex. So something as simple as, what type of language do I use when I'm communicating with people? To your point, Casey, that looks very different if you're talking to your neighbor who's 10 years younger than you. Looks very different if you're talking to a teacher. Looks different if you're talking to mom and dad, if you're talking to your grandparents, if you're talking to your peer. And so and within the world of peers, right, you've got colleagues, you've got your best friend, you've got acquaintances, you've got someone who happens to be your age who you met in the grocery store. And so the skill, that very skill of speaking, to take a simple one, looks incredibly different depending on what the context is. And so when we're thinking through social skills, we think about what skill is appropriate in what context. A classic example is greetings. People drill and kill teaching kids to greet each other, right? But if you think about it, if you were to get on an airplane and sit down next to a stranger and you walked up to them and said, hi, my name is Casey. What's your name? It's really nice to meet you. That person's going to want literally nothing to do with you. That would be a horribly unsuccessful social skill, right? Because what greetings look like to a stranger on an airplane is doing some small talk about the weather, checking for signs of interest. If you're getting smiles, great, that means you're on the right track. If the person's nose deep in their book and trying to pretend you don't exist, you probably back up 10 steps and try something else. And if you're getting signs of interest, then after several minutes of small talk, you might say, oh, hey, by the way, my name is Casey. It's really nice to meet you. That's what an appropriate greeting looks like. It's going to look very different if you're saying hi to your teacher that you've met 1,000 times before, right? Or to your best friend when you're texting. So we have to think about that level of complexity when we're teaching, and we have to teach to very specific scenarios and think about which scenarios are particularly important for this learner. So that's kind of my first thought is, as a parent, so your swearing example, of course we want to teach kids that you don't just run up to the principal and start cursing, right? That's not going to get you very far. You don't want to run up to your boss and do that. You don't want to do that in front of your grandparents. Now, punishing cursing in and of itself in its entirety could be detrimental, because to some degree, teenagers curse. And if you're the kid who's always tattling on everybody when they curse, you're going to lose friends. So there's that careful balance of what's appropriate with which group of people, and what role as a parent am I playing? Am I the communication partner? Am I the facilitator of this interaction? And your responses are going to change because of that. And I completely forgot what your second question was, Casey.
No, it's totally fine. I had just two quick comments. One, it sounds like parents' best role is to be people to practice on in specific context that's differentiated. Like you don't practice with parents of how you talk to friends,
right.
But you could practice with parents of how do I talk to someone that I respect and that has some seniority and stuff. And the second thing I just wanted to say is I am going to be on an airplane on Saturday, and you described my worst nightmare of sitting next to someone talking to me throughout it. Even though I do find it endearing when I can tell that it's someone that is practicing social skills, and so I always try it. So Sam, I wanted to pull in just a little bit of, me in executive function, so he's got to tie things back. So often as professionals, like some people are forced into social skills work, and there's this idea where I've heard often, I don't want to be more social. And I'd love just to hear like your angle on what that might have to do with goals and like a really almost meta-linguistic issue of what is social and why that's so important when starting with social skills development, of getting on the same page of what does being social mean?
Yeah, so that was a great kind of setup to my response, which is if somebody says I don't want to be more social, then my immediate question is why not? What about it is uncomfortable for you? What about it do you not like? What about it do you not like to participate in? Because sometimes people don't want to be social because they don't want to be social. And sometimes they don't want to be social because they're afraid of the consequences to being social because they struggled with it in the past or have been unsuccessful with it in the past. And because, you know, like Megan said, social skills are so complex, right? How and when to use social skills is just as important as the skills themselves. So again, like Megan said, like it's if you know how to greet people, that's great, but it's only as good as if you use it appropriately so that you're setting yourself up to be have a positive response. I tell a story a lot when I'm talking about social skills, and when I was working with a college student who had a diagnosis on the autism spectrum, very high functioning, very, very intellectually gifted, was doing really great in school, having a very difficult time making friends. And he said something to me that has always kind of stuck with me in terms of my how I understood social skill deficits in students that needed more social skills based instruction. And he said to me at one point, I never know what I can say to who and what reaction I'm going to get. And so that really prevented him many times from engaging in social opportunities because he wasn't able to read the room. He wasn't able to utilize context in the environment to understand how to use it and understand what type of response he was going to get back. So when you're talking about social skills goals and goal setting and hesitation towards wanting to be social, it's really important to figure out what are the obstacles and why doesn't the individual want to be social, and can those reasons be turned around into goals that will help them down the road to be more successful in a social environment.
And yeah, and so just like a little bit further, like in your work, Megan, is the goal to be more social, or is the goal more to be just social belonging? Like whatever that, like I feel like so often when we talk about these things, like the idea that pops into my head when I think about it is someone with 50 friends that keeps in touch with everyone. So I can't even imagine like the high schooler that's looking at the popular kid and the idea of you need social skills instruction, you should have more friends. But how do you approach and how should professionals kind of approach of what that goal is? Like, and is that something common that you see, that some of the hesitation is because their idea is not what they actually want? It's not a goal of theirs, so they're resistant at first.
Yeah, that's a good question. So when we think about social goals in general, or any goal for that matter, we think of a concept called social significance, which is essentially what is meaningful to that person. Because what's meaningful to me could very well be different than what's meaningful to you, Casey, which is different from what's meaningful to you, Samantha. And so it is a process of complete individualization. When we define goals and objectives for kids, teenagers, young adults, we take a look at what would make life more meaningful and more exciting and more happy, quite frankly, for that individual. For some of our kids, that's something as simple as being able to share joint attention with somebody, right? That's what's going to make life meaningful and happy. For some of our kids, it's, do I know how to text? For some of our kids, it's, can I manipulate the, I don't even know what it's called, on the Nintendo Switch, where you toggle the jostle, you get your character moving through Among Us.
Casey knows. He knows what it is.
I'm sure you do.
I wish I did. That just made me feel even older that I don't. But
I'm no professional in Among Us, in case you would like to learn. But that's what's meaningful to some of our kids and some of our families, because that's what kids are doing. And so it is incredibly individualized. I will say, one of our biggest goals is to teach all of our kids that people are fun. And that doesn't mean you need to have 900 friends, and it doesn't mean you have to be the extrovert who wants to go sing karaoke, on a Friday night. Like, that's not what that means. What it means is that what makes life happy is people, right? And relationships. And so sometimes we have kids who have been burned really bad by people and who have had really traumatizing or negative experiences. And so they have learned, because of their environment and the things that have happened to them, that people are aversive, and social relationships are something I should avoid because they result in negative things that I don't want to be a part of. So bullying is a classic example of that, right? Social anxiety is another one where you see a lot of that. And with those types of learners, our very, very first step is to teach them that people are fun. And the way that we do that is by figuring out whatever it is they're passionate about. That could be baseball, that could be Among Us, that could be trains, it could be numbers. And what we do is we make that activity even more fun because we're a part of it. So if that means we're going to play Among Us for 2 hours and I'm going to act like I know nothing and you're going to teach me everything and I'm going to be insanely excited about it, that's great and wonderful, because you just had a ton of fun, but you learned that it was more fun because I did it with you. So now the next time when you come to our session, you're motivated, you're engaged, you want to be there. And it's a little bit, it's a process, and it's not an overnight process, right? But with repetition, we teach kids that people are something you want to be a part of. And over time, that translates to what's socially significant for you. And to your point, it's not always having 900 friends. It might just be having one best friend you can call. And that's okay if that's what success means to you, right? So that's my
look, everything needs to really be individualized to have the largest impact. It's when you try to have a cookie cutter approach that we start imposing as opposed to adapting to what people really want. And so, Sam, I know we've one of the first things you did at New Frontiers was create a summer program.
I was just thinking about the summer program.
So we're not doing it pandemic with the rain on the parade, but Summer in the City was one of the first things when you left your previous career and came into New Frontiers. Like, from the get-go, it wasn't academics. That was part of it, but this social piece was a component. And so I know you were so proud of that being one of the first things. And so what was what are some, and then I'm going to go to Megan as well, but what are some core components of a well-designed social program for any of the professionals here, as some advice of building up their own social programs, but then also for any parents here, if they're looking for social programs, what are the things that they should be looking out for?
Great. And so I would say first and foremost, it's the authenticity of the experiences. And I think that was the biggest lesson that we learned from Summer in the City. And so a big primary piece of Summer in the City was developing social skills. And so we were, taking our students all throughout Manhattan and going on different adventures and activities every day. And what we found was that when we were in the office in an environment where we were controlling the environment, the social skills that our students were demonstrating were very different than what they were demonstrating in a real world environment. And so that authenticity of the experiences piece was very important, because when we controlled the environment, we slowed the pace down. We helped to filter out distractions. We controlled our responses. That's not how the real world works. And so then we would go out and things were loud and they moved very quickly and people had different personalities. And so it was that being able to get used to the pace, the tone, the context, and the environment in its natural habitat is really important to practice social skills. So I think we always found it very helpful to talk about and provide direct instruction in a controlled environment so that we could really get to the granular pieces of what makes social interactions work, but then take that information and practice it in the real world, because the real world is messy and you can't plan what's going to happen. And that's when social skills become very, very important, because we're not always there. And so if we want our students to be able to survive socially on their own, they need to be able to take different scenarios and different contexts that are thrown at them, think about the context, read the context, make a decision about how they're going to engage socially in that situation, and then follow through with it. And then read the response they get back to the response that they gave to the receiver. So, you know, that just kind of throwing them out into the real world with some guided coaching and support behind them was so incredibly powerful. And a lot of our students would say, this is amazing, like this is exactly what I needed, like this is real, like, you know, this is better than any classroom, this is real learning, because they were engaging in an environment that they were very uncomfortable with before, because they didn't know how to interact in it and they didn't have enough practice with it. And we were practicing it every day, so it was just, you know.
I love it. I know we're doing like some virtual social groups now, but I know Alyssa, one of our coaches who has run it, has purposely shown up like 10 minutes late because she wants to see how they're engaging in the room. So trying to give more of those authentic experiences of you're stuck in a waiting room with people, talk, like, what are you doing? It also just, I just like sharing my memories of when I ran Summer in the City. There was a kid that we were on Governor's Island. I think it was Governor's Island. There was like a taco truck, and we went up to the taco truck and he wanted a taco and he expected me to order it for him. I'm like, I'm not your mother. Like, I'm not going to order your taco for you. Order it yourself. You want to eat. And so I just like to share that because Sam pointed out something very important. Social skills aren't just making friends. Social skills is how you engage with the world. We think of friends, and those are great social experiences, but you have to work with colleagues, you have to order tacos, you have to engage with people. So it's not just limited to that. So Megan, was there some other things, like when you were designing your program, what were some of the core aspects that were really important? You can re-highlight some of the things Sam shared as they resonate for you, but then also anything else.
Yeah, definitely. So you articulated beautifully exactly what I was kind of thinking, and I'll add to it a little bit. So the concepts you described, we call them in our science natural environment teaching, which is basically, instead of, and you'll never see us do this, we never do script memorization, we never drill and kill the rules. Those things result in kids or young adults or teenagers who can then tell you the exact rules of what they should be doing in real life, and then they go into real life and they can't do any of them. And it's horribly sad. We get so many families who have invested a lot of time and money in programs that have correlated with an increase in their child's ability to recite back what they should be doing, but no contextual application. So, okay, so what do we do about that? And you hit it right on the head there, Sam. It's about teaching loosely from the start. So everything we do, yes, we use the principles of learning. Yes, we use evidence-based instruction. You will hear us doing role plays and giving feedback and explaining that exact thing you talked about with the interpretation and inferencing and how your output impacts somebody's next response, right? But we do it in the context of play, right? And play looks different for a 5-year-old than it does a 13-year-old than it does a 21-year-old. But to some degree, we all play. Just some of us play by reading a book before bed, and some of us play by playing video games, and some play with trains, and it looks different. But what we do is we embed the principles of learning within play, because that's how you get contextual practice opportunities. I've said it before, I'll say it again, social skills is as complex, if not more complex, than calculus. And so I think it's silly when we expect kids to learn something as complex as calculus in one sitting, right? Because we would never ask them to learn calculus in one sitting. So one of the things we really emphasize when you're looking for a quality social skills program is to be sure that the program isn't teaching one skill on one day and then moving on forever. Because then you're not providing that repeated contextual practice. You might be working on one particular objective, but you're providing many, many, many opportunities to practice that skill in what as closely as possible resembles real life. And we purposefully put an emphasis on what we call teaching loosely. Okay, so there's first of all teaching loosely in terms of settings, which you touched on beautifully there, you know, going to different places, practicing in different places. There's teaching loosely in terms of people. So if you practice your skills with the same adults and the same peers for 12 weeks straight, you will only be able to apply those skills to that adult and those peers, right? You're not going to be able to, you may be able to, but it's very much harder to spontaneously generalize those skills to other people. So we have to rotate people, rotating instructors, rotating peer groups, and then rotating stimuli, which, you know, is basically the activities you're doing. So if we're working on asking questions, we might do that in the context of small talk. We might do it in the context of a game of would you rather. We might play never have I ever. And all of those things work on asking questions, but it makes sure that you are able to do it in varied contexts, not just the same activity all the time. So that rotation is, and that teaching loosely is critically important from my perspective to finding a quality program.
And so just as a follow-up with that, again, like I started off with saying, like, this is a very educational lens to teaching social skills. And so for anyone that doesn't have an education background, a lot of what Sam and Megan are talking about is this concept of explicit instruction, which is research-based and has very clear phases to it. And so I wanted Megan first for you, and then Sam, if you have anything to add in, how important is, I hate the word failures, but I'll use it here, social failures. How important is bad social experiences in this process? Like, should professionals or parents be trying to always create the perfect scene? Like Sam said it before, the natural world is insane. The natural world doesn't follow a plan. So how important is that in imbuing that in the social skills instruction of sometimes bad outcomes resulting from our efforts?
I just bought a sign for the office today that said something to the degree of, I never lose, I either win or I learn something. So that's my response. But yeah, so I think it's a two-folded step. So what we, again, don't want to do is teach kids that people are something you want to escape and avoid, right? So if you throw kids into social scenarios that are really, really hard or really, really aversive, and let them have failure after failure after failure, that's a disservice, right? Because then all they're learning from that is, get me away from people, I want nothing to do with them in the future, because this is hard, scary, and frustrating. Now, with of course adequate supports and good teaching and all of that, I think that there's something huge to be said about, we learn from mistakes. That's how people learn, right? So at its most foundational behavioral principle, you learn not to touch the stove after you've touched it one time and burned your hand, right? That's how people learn. That's part of the process. So while we want kids to be supported, we do not want their experiences to be overwhelmingly negative. So we have to provide the supports and the scaffolding and the evidence-based instruction to ensure that they have the skills to be successful. It is important for them to, on occasion, in a way that maintains their dignity and helps them to figure out what to do next, have them contact that reinforcement contingency of, oh shoot, that didn't get me what I thought it was gonna get me, right? Yelling at my friend did not get me access to this activity that I wanted. compromising might have gotten me there, right? And contacting that contingency is important to the learning process. And so I think it's a careful balancing act for sure.
And I guess like that does bring up a great thing, because like providers are constantly balancing confidence building with learning opportunities. And if you have too many negative opportunities that it's, let's learn from this, it didn't go well, like that's going to impact confidence. So we're balancing the two. And so, Sam, I just wanted to pull in about that idea of like the inputs to the outputs, like our social, like the individual's outputs impact someone else and how they're going to react. How important is, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the intensity of the outcome that you could have. So like going and screaming at a friend and saying they're the worst person in the world, like that could have a really bad outcome. You could lose that friend. But I'm also thinking about if like the very, like I know I always say to people, ask for help. What's the worst that can happen is you get denied. So how important is that in social? Like, and I'm thinking of a lot of social anxiety, because with social anxiety, it's like everything is going to have the worst outcome in the world. So where does that play into designing some of these programs of teaching? Like, what is the intensity of the reaction that you could get?
I think it's it's all about understanding, being able to read and understand how your message is going to potentially be received, and how you then receive messages from other people. And so it's all about perspective, right? And so the important thing is to be able to understand that the different perspectives. This is where kind of we see a lot of theory of mind come into play, right? How, put yourself in the other person's shoes. How would you want to be, spoken to if you were the one that was receiving the message? But then at the same time, kind of only taking things with a grain of salt when it's coming at you. So it's kind of like, it's a very gray area, but I think it demonstrates all the more reason why explicit instruction and having these conversations is important when you're teaching social skills. Because if these perspectives aren't developed naturally through the natural observation and interactions that are happening in social interactions in the environment, then you're going to see that a lot of people that can't develop these skills, let's say naturally, are constantly struggling because they're not sure how to take another person's perspective, why it's important to take another perspective, or to take things lightly because it doesn't really matter that much when it comes at you. So, it's very complex, but it demonstrates how incredibly important it is to have these conversations with students that are demonstrating signs of social anxiety, or demonstrating, signs of having a difficult time communicating with other people.
That kid with the taco, I remember saying to him, like, what's the worst that can happen? The guy gives you a bad look, but if you still get a taco, who cares, right? You get a taco. Like, and so like it was then he did it. Like he just had a false assumption of what could happen. Like, is this guy's going to bite your head off? And I don't say that to make less how he felt. He needed the question to be asked to challenge how he was feeling.
Right.
Not to question the feeling, but for him to have that question in his own head. What is the taco stand guy going to do to me? It's going to be okay. So we got 2 questions from the audience, but I wanted to ask 2 fairly quick questions about some program design stuff. So, and this might be a quick one. A good social skills program is going to have both instruction of skills and the practice and repeated practice. Okay, you both don't even need to speak. I got resounding nodding of yeses to that one.
In an authentic environment.
Good. Okay. And so the one other thing, and this is Megan, we'll start off with you. So we want to build the confidence so that they're set up for social successes, so that they see the value in people. So when looking at social programs, how they're being set up, and this is in group settings, because I know some social programs have one-on-one components as well, but in a group setting, should professionals act as kind of puppeteers to set up the best group for success? Should they just, whoever comes in within this age group, because that's what the world looks like? Like, how do you approach the formation of groups? And how is that a recommendation that you would pass on to some others from your experience?
Yeah, so we have a really unique formula. Keeping in mind that the purpose of our program is that initial skill acquisition, right? And then working to generalize that across people, places, and time. So we have a formula. Our formula includes a whole host of things, but same age peers. Surprisingly, we get that question a lot from families. You know, you're going to put my 16-year-old with a 5-year-old. No, we are not. We're looking for the same peers. We do boys groups, girls groups when we're tackling some particular topics that may be more sensitive. So in those teenage years when we're starting to dive into dating and relationships and sexuality and all that fun stuff, we sometimes will, although not all the time, right? We have some groups, again, individualization. We have some groups where the kids really need the opportunity to practice across different genders, and that's important for the skills that they're working on. So that's all individualized. We look for what we call, and we put cutesy names to it, but a common fundamental focus. So what I mean by that is a shared learning theme. We might have a group that's fundamental focus is conversation. We might have another group that's fundamental focus is cooperation. So we have a whole different host of what we're working on. And what we try to do is we pair kids based upon common interests, right? Because that's a foundation for friendship. We do not put a Disney lover in the same group as a Disney hater because that's a recipe for disaster. And then that fundamental focus, but complementary strengths and weaknesses, because we want everyone to have the opportunity to learn from somebody. But we also know that it stinks to always be the kid learning from somebody. And so we want everybody to have the opportunity to serve as a leader. Now, I have yet to find a group that everybody meets every single one of those criteria exactly perfectly. Why? Because that's not the real world, right? So it does happen sometimes where I get two teenagers who are both really into Nintendo Switch and they're working on similar but different things, and that has happened, and the potential in that grouping for real true friendship is significant. There are also going to be deviations from that formula because people are diverse, populations are diverse, and we embrace that because, to your point, that's real life, right? And we move systematically through this process. So we have kids who are brand new to us who really need structure, they really need support. They're at those fundamental skills of learning how to engage with people without engaging in huge problem behaviors. And so we do a lot more structuring and a lot more support for those kids because they're overcoming the big barriers and they're working through the behavioral piece. As they get those skills down and they get fluent and they're successful, we make it harder by switching the groups and putting you with a peer that's going to challenge you a little bit more so that when you use your words to ask for the thing, sometimes your peer is going to say no. And that may not have been what I would have done for you at the very start of skill acquisition. But now that you've got the fundamentals down, that's what you need. You need a group that's not perfect because that's the practice opportunity. So I think it's a process. We have a formula for carefully structuring that process that I definitely recommend doing at the start of instruction. But I think there's value as kids are learning and growing in varying those groupings and making them more challenging and putting more thought into what's going to spontaneously generalize to other places.
Great. Did you have something to throw in, Sam? I mean, I was thinking of things I'd say, and that was very comprehensive. It hit on a lot of points. But Sam, if you had something to throw in, please do.
No, I was just going to reinforce. I think, there's such a developmental piece to social skills that, I just think of my own children again, not that I ever talk about them, but my 9-year-old's social needs and wants and drives are very different than my 13-year-old's. So I think it's, I think it's important to take that into consideration, that a lot of times it can happen very rapidly. The differences in what the social expectation is, but also the social needs are as children are moving through elementary, adolescence and into teenagers and young adulthood. And so it's definitely a big part of grouping individuals together to participate in social skill opportunities.
And I mean, I would also just say, when dealing with learning differences, there's also the aspect of cognitive flexibility. And so sometimes people don't know other interests they might have and how they can learn other interests. So just for some people, like, it's not always about everyone coming in with exactly identical profiles. They're going to talk about the same thing. They always, like, that could be nice sometimes, but a little diversity, as Megan said, is always good, because you might learn something that you never knew you liked. Like, I never thought I would be interested in musicals. I enjoy them, and it's because, like, my mom enjoys them. So it's not like the best social example, going to musicals with my mom, but like, I didn't know that unless I kind of stuck my neck out there sometimes. So this I am also just sharing for parents, like, when looking for certain programs, don't try to force your kid to be exactly the same, but it is a balance between the two of what the group looks like. So we got 17 minutes left, and so I want to go through. We got some 4 good questions coming in. So this first one is just, we can never escape the pandemic and what it's done to us virtually and everything. So how has the switch from more in-person social environments to virtual gone? And how is that adapting? And, like, is there going to be a long-term place for virtual style social skills instruction? So Megan, you want to start off with that one?
Sure. So we have an interesting perspective on this, because the Hangout actually started in the middle of the pandemic. We weren't doing what we were doing formally until there was a pandemic, which opened up our opportunities in terms of virtual instruction. I will say, in order to access virtual instruction, there have to be certain prerequisite skills that we need to teach. So if your child or your client is somebody who's running away from the computer or turning off Zoom every time it turns on, you've got some prereq skills you need to teach. You need to teach your child that you are fun even when you're on the computer, right? Which just goes back to that original concept I talked about making people more fun just because you're a part of it. Your first step, if that's what's happening, is to teach the child that Zoom is fun and that Zoom is something you want to be a part of. And you better run over to this computer because I've got the coolest thing to show you. That's step one. I think that as many places, I actually worked in a public school before I opened the Hangout spot in the middle of the pandemic. So I did do the distance learning thing for some time there, and rapidly. I mean, it was literally day one, we were all going in person and we didn't even know what coronavirus was. And the next day we were all virtual instructors. And there was zero prep time. And I think that, in fairness to educators and providers, we had no idea. And so there was a lot of learning to do. And inadvertently, that step was often missed because we just didn't even realize it was an important step to take at that time. So I think that's one of the biggest barriers we see. I will say 2 points on virtual instruction. It can be epically, because that's the only word that can describe it, epically effective. We have children in our program who have no verbal communication system at all and virtually no joint attention with other people, who have made unbelievable progress using virtual instruction, done through an evidence-based program with teaching that virtual instruction is fun. So it is possible. If you have barriers, it's just a matter of thinking through how to overcome those barriers using the evidence-based teaching. The other point I want to make is, like it or not, I don't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but I think it's something like 73%, don't quote me on that, but something like that of communication between teenagers occurs through technology. So what was very interesting was when all of these kids started joining our program virtually, we realized that, yeah, they might have social skills deficits in real life, but oh man, they also have social skills deficits through technology. And man, do we have an obligation to teach that, because guess what? That's how kids communicate and that's how they interact. And so if we're only teaching in-person social skills, well, we're missing out on that huge majority of interaction with other people that occurs through technology. And so you might get a kid who's really socially successful in real life, but then can't access any relationships through technology. So I actually think it has a huge role to play. It's not going anywhere, even when the pandemic goes away. And yes, we have to teach healthy habits, but we have an obligation to teach those skills to our kids, and thinking through how to do that the right way. I just rambled. Sorry.
It's quite all right. I was thinking of all the horrible things that can happen on Snapchat, and like if we actually like teach how to use these platforms accurately, rather than going in and just the assumption of, no, that's bad social communication, shunned, we can't talk about that, you have to do it in person. They're going to use it, and it's like, why fight it? Like it's where social activity occurs. I know one kid, I actually used it as one of his goals. He wanted to go into Snapchat by 9 p.m. I'm like, perfect, let's get our homework done. I think he said something to me like the girls are on Snapchat by 10 p.m. So he wants to have his work done by then. I'm like, whatever gets it done. And Sam, I know like what we've done is we've had some people that started off with one-on-one social virtual coaching. Then they did a dyad with one other, and then they joined a larger group. And that wasn't something we had done a lot of before. So how is that kind of complementing what Megan said? How is that an adaptation towards this virtual learning? Like why was that a direction we went in?
I mean, I think it's, I think it's a combination of just generally where the culture is going, but also, coupled with not really having any other choice, right? And I think one of the messages that was being, that everybody understood in the beginning of the pandemic was we all started to feel very lonely very quickly. Regardless of social skills deficits or not, we all were limited in our ability to be able to socialize and be with other people. And as humans, we tend to be naturally, social beings. And so, I think between the combination of not having any other opportunity, but really seeing that with the way technology is and how the young, the younger generations have such a different level of access to it, and it holds such a different level of meaning for them. It made the most sense. And I think then we started to see what it did allow for was the flexibility of being able to group students with others that they may not necessarily have ever had a social opportunity with before because of geographical barriers, right? So now, we're able to get students together that have common interests or that are working on similar social skills that could be from across the country, and that wouldn't have been an opportunity that they could have had before. So I think we're just looking at times are changing, and you need to kind of roll with those changes. Looking at from a larger perspective, when we come out the other side of the pandemic, there's going to be a lot of employers that will be allowing their employees to continue to be working from home, and that requires a virtual component. So, the younger children need to be able to learn how to navigate a virtual environment pretty proficiently, because as they get older, the expectation is that they're going to be able to use it.
You two are the best, because you can take a struggle, pandemic, this is difficult, how do we adapt it, and make it into a positive answer. If there are silver linings to
because
this,
we're educators.
There we go. It's the only way to get through the day is to see the silver linings. So here's another one, and either of you can jump in for this one. So in your professional opinions, do you feel that self-confidence plays a big role in effective social skills?
That's a good question.
You want to take a stab first, Megan, jump right in.
All right, let's see what I got. So I think that one of our primary goals when we're teaching any skill really is to build confidence, right? So there's two elements to this. There's confidence and there's competence. So I'm sure we all have known people who are extraordinarily confident but have absolutely no competence, and they can be really annoying to work with, right? So it's like the workplace. When you have a colleague who's got all the confidence in the world but is totally incompetent, you're like, I don't want to work with that person. I don't want them. I'm not doing the group project with them, right? That's not successful. On the flip side of that, and I'm again thinking about colleagues in the workplace that I've worked with throughout my journey, because that's when I have this conversation, what kind of resonates with people. Have you ever worked with somebody who's unbelievably competent but not confident, right? And that's not successful either, because you know the skills, you're really good, you've got talent, you can do this, you could make the world an infinitely better place, but you don't recognize that in yourself. And so then you're not accomplishing all of the wonderful things you could because you lack that confidence. So it's a two-folded thing. I think we need to teach kids the skills they need to feel socially competent so that they can be successful, but we also need to inspire confidence because the two go hand in hand. And I think that all goes back to good teaching, and that balance. It occurred to me before, Casey, when you said, the balance of positive and negative experiences. There's a research backing behind that. It's called 5-to-1 praise to error correction, right? So for every one time we correct kids, or adults for that matter, we should be praising them 5 times, so that the science is applicable in education. It's also applicable in marriages that have 5 times as many positive statements flowing as they do negative ones last longer. Same thing in the workplace. So that's one of the primary strategies we use to increase confidence, but I think both are important.
It also just made me think about like the positive experience of having friends. When you have a couple, like when you're feeling not self-confident, you can lean on these people to make you laugh, make you feel good. But if you don't have those, then it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy of worthlessness and self-doubt. And so finding those people, and just from my experience, it's sometimes as simple as a question when you see some lack of self-confidence is, have you reached out to a friend? Have you talked to someone? Invite someone over. Well, no, like what if they're going to judge me? Invite someone you're so close with that you're not worried about that. And then I've seen that as something. Sam, I don't know if you had something else also to throw in there.
No, I think Megan answered it really quite beautifully. And I think the self-confidence and effective social skills are related to each other, in that, just like Megan said, when you don't trust your judgment to be good at something, then it's you have poor self-confidence in that area. So if you don't think that you have good social skills, then it certainly can affect your self-confidence in that area. And all the more reason to teach those skills explicitly, to help to develop, as as an after effect, that confidence in that area. And I think we've saw a lot of that in our summer program. That a lot of students very hesitant to engage socially, and by the end we couldn't shut them up. They were just, they didn't want to leave. They just kept going, and you could definitely see how it was related to their self-confidence in that area.
I will also just say, when we use this term self-confidence, Megan, you did a great job of separating out. There's different types of confidence. You're confident in different areas. Someone could be really confident at playing Nintendo Switch. That doesn't mean that when they're approaching social situations that they're confident in that. So just in the context of what we're talking about here, self-confidence is the self-confidence of friendships and communication. And right. So when I think of a lack of self-confidence in that realm, I'm thinking of that repeating question in your head, why would anyone want to be my friend? Why would anyone want to be my friend? And if that question's constantly going in your head, it's going to be hard to build the social skills. So almost leaning on a little bit of Maslow, like there might be other needs to work on first before really developing those other needs. So I think they do interplay, and there is some synergy in there as well. I'm going to answer this one question quick for both of you and then get to the last one before time runs out. So the question was, are either of you guys running social skills groups currently? The answer is yes. And so that you could totally throw into the follow-up survey to learn more about what the different ones, what they look like. This one about, is the Summer in the City program running? As of now, no. We don't want to be unsafe. We don't know what the world will look like. So a little bit of flexibility. We'll see what things look like in a couple of months. So this is also just something that comes up, and I love working with individuals diagnosed on the autism spectrum, because I feel like I've seen like the pieces come together and like that snapping moment of it makes sense. And this is something that comes up so often for practitioners. And so the question was, how do you develop good eye contact? And then my follow-up question, this is a little personal because I sometimes struggle with eye contact. Anyone here probably wouldn't say I'm not social. I'm sure I seem very social, but I am shy sometimes. So how do you develop good eye contact, and is it a necessary social skill? I think that's just such an important part because it is a little bit of a low-hanging fruit. You notice it. And so I'd love to hear Sam or Megan, whoever wants to jump in first on that one.
I can go first if you want.
Sure.
So 2 points. One, social significance. So if we are going to tackle eye contact, it is because we have determined, based upon input from the individual, if we can get it, as well as family, all the close people, that it's going to be socially significant, that it's something this individual wants to work on that would make a meaningful difference in their lives. And sometimes the individual can't tell us. So, if we're working with a 2-year-old who has autism and has no joint attention skills, one of the first thing we teach is, look at me to share in this experience. So I'm going to hold up this train, and oh my gosh, it's the coolest thing ever. And we're teaching the child to look at the train, look at us, and then look back at the train, because man, how cool is it to share in that experience with other people, right? That's a fundamental skill. You have to get that skill in order to learn pretty much anything else in life. So in that scenario, hugely socially significant. We teach it. Kids get it really quick when it's taught the right way. The other end of eye contact is shifting eye gaze to the speaker during conversation, right? And that's what I'm guessing this question is really targeting. And so when we tackle this, it's not because we're trying to change individuals. It's not because we want to tackle something and force people to do something that will make them uncomfortable. It's because it's already been determined in collaboration with that person and that person's family that will be socially significant for them and meaningful for them. So assuming that we've gone through that process and this is something we want to tackle and that we think will make an impact in somebody's life, and there are circumstances. So if you're going for a job interview and you never once look at the interviewee, or the interviewer, I should say, you're probably not going to get the job, right? So that is an example of when it would be appropriate to teach it. We don't teach eye contact. We teach shifting eye gaze. Random life fact, I now know because I've collected data on it. During conversation, we shift eye gaze to the speaker 9 to 11 times per minute. So we don't do this, right? Because that's weird. And we don't do this because that's weird. But what I'm doing is 9 to 11 times per minute, I'm looking away from you guys and then looking back at you. And so that's incredibly nuanced. We've actually told our kids, hey, 9 to 11 times per minute. We have some individuals who happen to be on the spectrum who are rule-governed individuals who will count. And they will literally count how many times they did it. But we teach it through games. We play games like Find the Speaker, where we call out silly words and you have to shift eye gaze to whoever called out the silly word so that it's not scary. It's not feeling like something that I'm obligated to do. When I do it, I get these weird feelings. It's fun. And we teach that hey, shifting eye gaze to the speaker can be pretty fun because we do it in the context of games and activities. And we provide that feedback to our kids when they engage in either staring or behaviors that might actually be detrimental, because that's not what we want to teach. So that's kind of my take on it, but it's super nuanced. I'm happy. I love talking about this stuff. So if you have more questions, you can reach out to me and I can talk to you about it all day long. So
I was thinking of that card game Pig, where you pass the cards, and when you get 4 in a row, you stick out your tongue.
Yeah.
And just to kind of rehash some of that, use the games as practice. But the other thing that was a little bit, I don't want to say hidden in your answer, but there was a lot of content in what you just shared that I wanted to highlight was, what is the purpose? What are we trying to accomplish with the eye contact? And I know that's something that we've talked about with some of our clients at New Frontiers is, if you don't have eye contact and you wonder why the other person stops talking to you, that conveys the nonverbal communication of you're not interested. And so eye contact is an affirmation of interest. And so now that it's actually rooted in a goal. Oh, like that strategy of eye contact, there's a purpose to it, which does go back to explicit instruction. What are we trying to achieve? What are the steps and why are we doing that? Sam, I may have just stole your thunder as an answer. I didn't know if you had anything else about eye contact.
Once again, Megan nails it. I mean, it's, we definitely speak the same language. It's just about how is the skill serving us, and I think that in experiences, sometimes eye contact can be difficult, very difficult for certain students that we've worked with and clients that we've worked with. And when it becomes tedious and difficult to the point where they can't do other things other than focus just on the eye contact, then we have to really assess how important it is in whatever situation it is. And so, it's just really important to understand that because eye contact might be easy for us, it might be very tedious for somebody struggling with it. And we have to understand its purpose and its intent in specific situations, because there may be situations where it would be nice, but not really necessary. Whereas in others, it might be a non-negotiable.
I can't wait to see more research come out about how some virtual schooling and stuff might be impacting that. Mm-hmm. Because really through the screens, you're never really making eye contact. I think I look at my own eyes more than I look at anyone else's eyes when I'm looking at a screen. But it's like I'm looking at the camera now, but I'm not looking at eyes. So it'll be interesting to see with that and practicing some of that. So
Agreed.
On that, everyone in the audience that has additional questions, if you want to learn more about our specific programs, you can always put that in the follow-up survey, or you can reach out to either of us. You can find us, but we will be sharing the survey amongst ourselves and follow up with any additional questions you guys have. And if anyone wants to set up a follow-up call, we're here. We like to nerd out on this stuff. We enjoy this stuff. And so we're happy to continue the conversation, whether you're professionals or families inquiring about programs. Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you, Sam. I hope you guys aren't like me and put off dinner until after this, because then you're probably approaching hangry zone like I am. But thank you so much. Megan Cave from the Hangout Spot, and then Samantha Feynman from New Frontiers in Learning. Thank you so much and have a great night.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Bye.